This is the dry run
Yeah,
for the, in
yeah.
first episode. So everyone, thanks for your patience.
Thanks. So I don't know too if you introduced us, but I can go ahead and do that if you haven't done it already, and I'll make it
I
quick.
was busy trying to get the microphone over. So why don't you go ahead and kick us off, Joe?
Hello, everyone. This is obviously a dry run. We're at the wheel. The platform that two and I are trying to stand up, where we're going to talk about cars, mobility, international competition, just about anything that has to do with getting from one place to another. Two, as probably most of you know, is a leader of Sino Auto Insights, which is an advised consultancy and content company, and is all about China and China's competitive rise. I'm a journalist. I worked for Reuters. I worked for the Wall Street Journal. I now write the High Speed Rodeo Substack on that platform. On this platform, comes out every week, except when I take a vacation next week. One quick thing, and then we're going to start talking about kind of what we see happening in the world right now. Um, Anything and everything you hear from either of us is not investment advice. We're just talking about the news, and we're talking about what we think is happening in the industry. Make your own decisions about that, as I'm sure I think everyone on this channel is pretty sophisticated and knows that. So two, there's a lot to get to. Even if we don't talk about the possibility of a war in the Middle East and a spike in oil prices, which hasn't happened. I have a thing called White's Law, which is that anytime the Detroit companies make a big pivot toward large trucks and V8 engines, that's when the Middle East is going to explode and there's going to be a surge in oil prices. Fortunately, that is not happening now. Oil prices are down, so we can kind of move on from that. I do want to let's talk about the other thing that's pretty.
Well, let me stop you there, Joe.
Yeah.
This is a live stream, so very interactive. Adam has helped us tremendously in the first 5 minutes by telling us he can hear us both. So the point of all this is to be able to ask us questions, Joe and myself. So feel free to post them into the chat. And as we're talking, I'll read them. Joe will read them, and then we'll either wait till the very end or we'll answer them as they show up. So we want to definitely make this more interactive because I also have a newsletter that's pretty one way, and it's interesting because we want to answer questions and talk about things that you are all interested in. So please feel free to post anything in the chat.
Yes, please do. So look, too, I want to start off talking about one of the big developments this week outside of the very big developments, and that's the launch. And I'm doing this for a reason that I'll of in a spectrum of soft launches, this seems like a super squishy marshmallow man soft launch. Very Robotaxis launched that are starting to take rides, passengers for rides in Austin. The passengers are invited. They appear to be largely drawn from kind of the fan base of Tesla. There's a Tesla employee in the front passenger seat, from my understanding. I've not been there, okay? I haven't seen it myself. In the front passenger seat, and the cars are in a very limited geo-fenced area, and they're not going out when the weather is bad and all of that. And even so, within less than a day and a half, it's already being reported by several outlets. I saw it first in TechCrunch, Reuters, Bloomberg. I think Bloomberg may have broken the story. NHTSA's already investigating what's going on in Austin with Tesla's robotaxis after reports and videos. I've seen them, maybe some others have, of Tesla's, violating traffic laws, veering into other lanes, and all that kind of stuff. So they're already under investigation. Two, what do you think about this? And I want you to get fairly quickly to kind of how you see Tesla's efforts competitively against what is happening in China on autonomous vehicles.
So let's create a framework and some scale here. So Tesla Austin this past weekend, they only really invited Tesla stands. So everyone that basically posted on social media, they were impressed. And there wasn't that many objective third parties unless you're looking at the videos that have been posted. Number one. Number two, Tesla said between 10 and 20 in Austin in a small geofenced area. Compare that to a Waymo that I believe has over 1,000 vehicles in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Austin, and a few other places. Okay, so this is a win for Tesla, but in order to get to Waymo, just for its US competitor, they're going to have to do a lot more, invest much more heavily into more vehicles and in more cities. And then number two, they do have the safety driver, they do have the remote driver. So in order to get those out, it's going to take a lot more um, miles between these vehicles. Um, because remember, Waymo, there's no safety driver. I've done the San Francisco and I've done the LA, and we're only talking about the United States. In China, there are well over 1,200, 1,400, 1,600, depending on who you talk to, from Baidu, from Pony, from WeRide, just to name the major players. And in China, they've converged a little bit. So the Robotaxi companies have all partnered with the second wave, meaning the deep routes, the Q crafts. They've all partnered with OEMs to get their hardware and software into more vehicles. And so if Tesla is going to do this alone, they're going to have to spend a huge amount of money to invest further into these robo taxis. But it's a win for Tesla because this system or this service that they promised to launch a year ago at least, and now they can say that they've done it. But if and when it opens up to the general public, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny because there's going to be a lot more videos, and this shouldn't surprise anyone. The bottom line is that level four autonomous or intelligent driving is really hard, and there's going to be mistakes made by these robo taxis. So the system was never going to be perfect, and no matter what the stands want to tell you. But in the grand scheme of things, it's step one, and they're a marathon and a half behind most of the other competitors who've been out in the market already. So
I had to look this up because it's been so long that I couldn't. Waymo put its first vehicle on a public street in 2015. And it was the Firefly, which is now was supposed to be in a museum somewhere, and I don't think it ever made it. But that was
it was in Peterson's. I think it's in Peterson's in LA. So
that was 10 years ago, and they had been working on it for 5 or 6 years prior. They're working on the technology for 5 or 6 years prior to that. So Waymo has been at this for 15, 16 years. They've had vehicles on public streets for a decade. I acknowledge that getting something on the street for Tesla is a big deal because Elon Musk's been promising this for years and not delivering. So finally, they have a product on the street. I think the thing that's going to be interesting to watch is one, do regulators cheer this as much as the people who the Tesla fans, or do they have a problem with Tesla's approach? Which, as again, I think a lot of people know, Tesla is not using sort of the belt suspenders approach. Waymo sensors to machine vision. They're using cameras and AI. Will that fly with regulators? Interesting to me that Texas, which has been very supportive and kind of open season in terms of regulation of autonomous vehicles, just this past week, the governor signed a bill that would tighten the reins on autonomous vehicle deployments.
On level four.
Yeah, well, basically saying we, the Texas regulatory machinery, are going to have a look at what you're doing, and if you're going to operate an autonomous service, they want to have a say. Now, again, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows exactly how tough they're going to be, but I would say that. I mean, you said they're going to make mistakes for sure. The question is, what severity of mistake will be tolerated? Made a mistake with Cruise, and they one of the cars ran down a woman on a street in San Francisco and dragged her, I think, like 20 feet. And then the management was not forthcoming about that immediately. Well, that was a very large mistake, and it cost them their business. I don't know that Tesla's going to have that problem, but I do think that it's a penalty for certain severity of mistake in autonomous vehicles is pretty high. So that's all. I think those are all risks that Tesla has yet to encounter, right? I mean, Waymo's been at it for 10 years. They've seen those risks. Some of those other companies you mentioned have too. So let's see how they do.
And this is where I'm a little bit confused because the system, the FSD that you and I can buy if we are to lease or purchase a Model Y or a Model 3 is legally a level 2 plus system.
Yes,
What
face up.
is the difference between this Model Y that's a Robotaxi versus a vehicle that or Tesla that you and I could buy? I'm not 100% sure what that difference is.
Tell you what, and Tesla doesn't want you to be sure. Again, I saw this in reporting done by others this week, but Tesla has turned over some data to, or has turned over data to NHTSA about the system, but they've insisted and demanded that data be kept private as a competitive uh, intellectual property that's competitive for Tesla. They don't want it disclosed. I, I understand that argument. Companies make that argument all the time. Again, I'm going to say I think that at some point Tesla and frankly all these AV operators may find themselves under a lot of pressure to disclose what's in the black box. How are their vehicles making decisions in sort of the trolley problem situations where you're going to hit one thing or the other, and how do you make those choices? I think it's going to be interesting to see how Tesla fares because their default mode seems to be it's none of your business how our system works, and we'll see.
And they got away with it when it was an intelligent driving system for private passenger vehicles. But now that this is a service to the public,
Matter.
first of all, will NHTSA and these other organizations create a lot more scrutiny? Because you and I, for the last several years, Joe, have been beta testers for Tesla drivers that have used FSD, which is not right. It is not right. And so the NHTSA finally grow some fangs and disable if there's any severe incidents or potential for severe incidents. They need to be full open kimono on the data, number one. But the stands won this weekend because the share price popped by 8%, and
Right. The market.
analysts that are also pumping Tesla's share price are saying this is foundational. These guys have never been in a Waymo or have not been to China. One of the two, or maybe both.
I mean, we both live in the Detroit metro area, which is going to I would guess will be the very last where there'll be any density of autonomous vehicle ride services. The weather here sucks, except right now. But I think that I mean, even if they get past the technical challenges, and again, we'll see. I'm not trying to say I know for sure. Then you get into the business model challenge. Uh, they're offering rides for 420, which of course is Elon Musk's favorite number, or one of them. Right?
I think most Americans know what 420 is.
So haha,
So
420. But at $4.20, can they make money? That's one question, kind of an obvious one. Two, who's going to their ride network? Uber has a ride network. They've plus or minus a decade building the subscriber base for their app, the expectations, the quality control, all those issues. They know where, when, and where people are going, and where what the density from point A to point B in any metro is. They have this enormous network that they have constructed, and Waymo is partnering with them to basically put their technology to work on that network that Uber has already spent billions of dollars, thousands and millions of person hours of time. Is Tesla going to build that from scratch? And so these are all questions that I have. But for anyone who's trying to kind of enter the business from a standing, start at their own goal line right now.
Here's another question, Joe, because to your point, Uber currently has a global install base of 170 million users. Okay. And so they are the picks and shovel people. They have Wave, which is a UK-based robotaxi startup that has San Francisco pilots coming up very soon, I believe. And they have Waymo in in Dubai. I believe they have WeRide. So they have Chinese robotaxi companies too. So they don't care if you're American or Western or Chinese. They're going to put you on the platform. Okay, and that gives these robotaxi companies 170 million users potentially. Okay, because Uber is a global app, number one. Number two, I had said this 5, 6, 7 years ago that in order for that install base to increase, that's why Uber has grocery. That's why Uber has, food delivery and micro mobility because it increases and opens up that install base. But the only two money makers that are going to be long term on Uber's platform are probably going to be eVTOL and Robotaxi.
Hmm.
And everything else is a money loser. To your point, how does Tesla get an install base like that? Unless they're undercutting the price of the rides. And if you're a publicly traded company, how much money can you lose before investors start to get upset?
Yeah, well, very good question. And I mean, obviously they're not upset yet, but we'll have to see how that plays down the road. Two, I don't know if you can see if there's any questions about this because I get you to.
Yeah, I'm checking right now. So um you keep going.
Okay. Well, so speaking, moving off of autonomous vehicles, but sticking with China, the subject we mentioned a couple times here. Um, I was struck this week reading coverage in Reuters, but other outlets as well about what's happening with the Chinese automakers. One, BYD landed the world's largest car carrier that they had built for themselves in Brazil.
They have a few of them now.
And they landed the first one of these monsters in Brazil and offloaded I think a couple thousand vehicles. And apparently now in Brazil, Brazil has a relatively open market to the Chinese automakers compared to say the United States, obviously. And apparently this event has triggered a lot of alarm in Brazil about the potential threat to their domestic industry. And I want to kind of bounce around with you, kind of where we at a moment here with the Chinese auto companies where home market is so, I mean, I'll say chaotic. You can come up with a better word, but seems it's chaotic. You've got an intense price war happening, value being destroyed all over the place. They're trying to export their way out of it. But even markets like Brazil, which were welcoming and open, now seem to be saying, whoa, wait a minute. You can't send massive car carriers here to flood our industry. If you're going to sell here, you need to build here. Talk about how you see this moment here with these Chinese. They're trying to go global, but also their own home market base seems to be in some kind of a whirlpool.
So those ships that BYD have made or built for themselves, I think the largest carrier carries 7,000 vehicles. And I think they have multiple of these ships. And the reason that these boats are going to Brazil is because they're anticipating that tariffs will be put up. Interesting thing. South America, Brazil is the largest passenger vehicle market in South America. The number one brand in Brazil currently is Fiat.
Right.
Okay. And if you look at over the last 4 or 5 years, GM has invested over $1 billion. Great Wall, Baidu, Stellantis, uh, and quite a few other automakers. And that's the next beachhead. Okay. They see South America as the opportunity. And the crazy thing is that with the grid stability in South America, you and I know living in Metro Detroit, our grid isn't even that stable. So in South America, it's not going to be. And in particular, the clean energy of choice in Brazil is ethanol.
Right.
That plays into BYD because they have the DMI or the PHEV. So let's say lion's share of future clean energy vehicles in South America are going to be ethanol based. And so, but they see Brazil as being kind of the manufacturing beachhead to the rest of South America and parts of Central America. And I think they were looking at Mexico kind of going down and then into the United States. To your point, we're looking at a price war that's close to 4 years now. And suppliers in China are saying no mas. They're waving the white flag because it's taking over 120 days to get POs or invoices paid. And you have followed the automotive sector enough where you can probably remember there's a tier three supplier that just screwed up the entire supply chain for the domestic automakers. Remember, there was the floods in Thailand that gummed up every Japanese automaker. And so we're getting to the point in China where the system is really really unstable from a supply chain standpoint, and so the Chinese government intervened and said, look, you guys got to pay these suppliers within 60 days. You also know, Joe, that it isn't unusual for OEMs to extend payment terms in times of need.
Right.
Now, in this situation, though, there is an overcapacity issue. The main outlets, the US market, the European market, the two largest markets outside of China, one is completely off limits for now. The other, the cost of doing business has gone up substantially. And so there is a scramble to get as many vehicles out because they're counting those in their sales numbers for 2025. Okay. And they've invested heavily in capacity. And I think the rule of thumb is generally if a factory is running at around 80% utilization, then it's making money. But there are a lot of there's a research report from Gasgoo that said in 2024 the China auto sector collectively ran at a 50% capacity utilization rate. 50%.
Yeah,
So,
no, not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And I do see, again, just this week apparently is signaling that that it wants to crack down on this practice. I think you alluded to it of companies designating vehicles that are right off the assembly line as used, and then, cutting the price and either shipping them overseas or dumping them in the market. I mean, all of that kind of behavior is those are symptoms of illness and of an unhealthy market. I've seen those things happen in the United States, perhaps not to the same scale. But when you see automakers dumping vehicles, into a market or putting them on ships and essentially at money losing prices, that's structurally unstable. And the question is, who's going to be the first to blink? Which province in China wants to see their hometown car company close a plant, right? I mean, again, no different from anywhere else in the world, but that does seem to be an issue, right?
and what we should really keep a closer eye on now are countries like Australia, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Singapore. See how many more exports go into those markets because at least in the emerging markets in Southeast Asia, it lends well to the Netas, the BYDs, whose price point generally is much lower than a Western automaker. And the one thing that's interesting is how the countries that don't have manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, react versus the countries that do. So Vietnam, there's domestic manufacturing for automobiles. In Thailand, the Japanese dominate for manufacturing, and they normally manufacture for all of SEA, but we know Indonesia has a lot of the nickel content. So they're trying to leverage that into bringing manufacture to Indonesia, move from Thailand and Vietnam to Indonesia. So these are kind of the 3D chess moves. And, with our administration being not as friendly to some countries, it's going to push those countries more towards China. And here's the God's honest truth, too, Joe. One of the things that I saw at the Shanghai Auto Show was Canadian dealership groups
Oh,
because our administration blew up the USMCA. So, Canada and Mexico, if we don't renegotiate and agree on a new USMCA, Canada and Mexico are going to become our competitors.
Well, and
and we're just going to be surrounded by Chinese brands.
Mexico already has entry from Chinese brands, right? I mean, they're putting beachheads in Mexico as we speak, right?
Yeah, I think that the Mexican president has kind of, l- uh, dialed back on some of that foreign direct investment because of the Trump administration. Now, I believe that within the next couple of years, somebody at BYD, maybe Stella, maybe Wang Trongfu is going to go to the Mexican president, and they're going to go to President Trump and be like, I'm going to write a $4 billion check. I'm either going to write it to Mexico, or I'm going to write it to the United States. Who should I write this to? So, because, you had mentioned this in previous conversations, the legacy automakers aren't growing.
No,
BYD is really the only company that's going to grow. Tesla's going to shrink this year. BYD is going to go from 4.27 in 2024 to well over 5 million units this year. And so they're stuffing the channels, but they're in 100 countries too.
yeah,
And they're the number one EV maker in Singapore, the number one EV maker in Israel, the number one EV maker in Thailand. So in the emerging markets, they're super strong.
yeah. And if you grab turf, you grab market share today, then it's the other people who are trying to take it from always harder and always more expensive. Hey, before we wrap up, too, I am good time seeing questions, but can you see them? There are.
Yeah, so Adam Bernard asks, haven't the Chinese been building market share and plants in South America for years now?
Yeah, I think the answer. Yes, they've certainly been talking about it. I mean, one of the things that's problematic for BYD in Brazil, as I understand it, is that they've promised to build a factory, but the production hasn't begun, or if it's begun only in dribs. And I think
Well,
that
so BYD got in a lot of trouble in Brazil because of the labor issue. So,
yeah, which by the way is not good for the brand at all, right? I mean, that they, if anything, they probably needed to do what the Japanese tried to do in the United States, which is kind of overperform on paying people and matching the market but now apparently what's happening in response to the pressure from the Brazilian and kind of the backlash from Brazilian labor unions, Brazilian incumbent Brazilian manufacturers, as you said, Fiat, Ford, is that BYD is making noises of yeah, we're serious, we're going to invest. So let's see what happens. But I do think that is going to be. I mean, the Japanese and subsequently the Korean automakers did set a pattern, which was exports first, followed fairly quickly by production within the major target markets. I don't think the Chinese are going to be able to do any different. It's a question of how quickly that happens. And you're right. I mean, we could do a whole nother segment on kind of the geopolitical. Uh, I think it's more difficult for the Chinese automakers than it was for the Japanese or the Koreans.
but
Um,
let me ask you this. Let me stop you there real quick, because I know you had written a book on Japan entering the U.S. market that everyone should read, because I think Joe will tell you there's a lot of parallels between what happened back then and what's happening now. One thing that I'm not clear about, Joe, is, did Japan have a ton of overcapacity when they entered the United States? Because if I'm the Chinese government, the reason I bring that up is, if I'm the Chinese government, I actually don't want BYD to build too much capacity, because it does nothing with the excess capacity in the domestic market.
so I don't think the Japanese automakers in the 80s had the same level of overcapacity that exists in China today. I mean, there are parallels are the parallels exist, but not exact. I don't think that was the problem, but and it certainly helped Toyota, Honda, and the rest of the Japanese automakers that uh, as they built factories in the United States and in Europe and in parts of the world, uh, their sales grew. So it wasn't as if you had suddenly a hollowed out manufacturing base back in Japan. The Japanese manufacturing base was still there. Um, in a lot of cases, certainly with Toyota, they redeployed some of the factories they had from building, tiny small econo boxes, which is what they started with, right, to building Lexuses, high value, high priced vehicles. They moved up the food chain, but growth, right, growth of the world market, growth of their own sales, enabled them to do that. Um, I think the Chinese situation might be more complicated for all the reasons that you've discussed, which is they're sitting on this massive overcapacity already at home. And if they go ahead and, BYD builds a factory in Europe, 300, 400,000 vehicles, another one in Brazil, are they going to be able to grow the total number of vehicles they sell to absorb all of that? Well,
And
maybe.
remember, because they make their own batteries too, they're going to have to invest in capex on the battery factory side too.
And and this is something that we try to say in our book, which is comeback, the fall and rise of the American automobile industry, fall and rise, then a rise, then a fall. But it's still it's still a good slice of that history in the 80s and 90s. I think that the problem for the Chinese automakers, though, will be kind of managing that tension between and this is what I was going to say. The Japanese, we talk about the Japanese. Really, it's not all Japanese automakers are created equal. No more so than any country's, any block's automakers. There's Toyota and Honda, and then Nissan. I think everyone on this stream knows that Nissan is now struggling, and some of the other automakers, most of the other smaller automakers, have all had mainly with the Toyota, under Toyota's umbrella. So in China, I think that's even more so because there's more Chinese automakers. I mean, there's BYD, there's maybe 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5 Chinese automakers that are really going to swing for the fences. A lot of the other ones are not. And
Well, they don't have the capabilities, they don't have the capital.
right.
They aspire to, but
yeah, the process of trying, you're going to see what we see today, which is what we've been talking about. This chaos.
Yeah, there's already 1 or 2 companies that are doing export only, meaning I build in China and export only because I can't sell these vehicles in China because it's so competitive.
Yeah. So no, it's going to be interesting to watch. And you're right. Kind of hanging over all of this is Donald Trump's trade policy. And when we come back and do this again, that policy will probably have changed.
One last thing that I'm going to throw out here for you as food for thought, Joe. Nissan is weak. They're probably a $7-8 billion company right now. What if, because remember, the rumor was Foxconn's kicking the tires on Nissan. What if a Chinese EV maker went up to Renault or went up to Nissan and say, you know what, I'm gonna buy you, because for those that don't pay that close of attention, Luca de Mea is leaving Renault. He's turned them around over a 5-year period, and Renault is mainly a French company. I think lion's share of their profits and revenues come from Europe. They effectively have no presence in China. And so if I'm a Chinese EV maker, or I'm an Apple or a Google that needs contract manufacturing but doesn't need the headache, I might buy, because Apple probably has what, 150, 170 billion dollars in the bank. Google, same. Amazon, same. So, they could take a $5 billion, $7 billion flyer, gut the management teams, keep the factories and the supply chains, and there you go. They don't need to work with any OEMs. And at least for Apple, I know that they are control freaks and that they would consider something like that if it was cheap enough and the technology internally was capable of competing against a Waymo, against a Tesla, and some of these Chinese players. I think the big reason they left the Apple car on the table was because they couldn't affordably or profitably build an Apple car. And so they'll revisit it for sure. Anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add to that. I mean, you're right. I mean, Stellantis is already apparently looking at perhaps selling Maserati. And so I agree. I think the Chinese brands that have money in the pocket and support from the government, uh, and as you say, the tech companies, there's more consolidation and redistribution of assets to be done here, and be interesting to watch. Well, look, I think we're going to wrap that up for this time. I appreciate coming aboard for this. Look for us for podcasts and and more live streams from Tu and myself at the wheel. And look for my High Speed Rodeo and Tu's Sino Auto Insights newsletter on Substack on a pretty routine basis. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll talk with you very soon.